And hello there, RosterWatch Nation. This is your friendly neighborhood trash man. My background looks a little bit different this week. That's because it is. I'm traveling right now, but I still have all the valuable information that you could ever need for your fantasy purposes going into this week 15 of the fantasy playoffs. So let's go ahead and get started with the fantasy fallout going into week 14 of the NFL season. First game, Patriots or Rams. Patriots lost this one 3-24. Cam Newton's arm looks done, and I don't expect him to do much against an improved Miami defense this week. Damian Harris is the only other Patriot you can rely on during the playoffs. Cam Akers is still unknown in 25% of leagues, which is insane after his last two outings. Make sure you own him and start him moving forward. Not much else from that game. Let's move on. Texans at Bears. Texans lost this one 7-36. David Johnson should be back from the COVID-19 list this week, so no need to consider Duke Johnson or Buddy Howell for the playoffs. To be honest, I wouldn't recommend David Johnson in most instances either. Brandon Cooks may be out for the remainder of the season, so make sure Chad Hansen and Kiki QT are owned. I actually think Hansen might offer more value as a red zone target than QT. He also led the Texans in targets with 7 on Sunday. On the other side of the ball, it was all Allen Robinson and David Montgomery for Chicago. But Cole Kmet did come in second in targets with 6 behind Robinson. With Minnesota and Jacksonville up next, he could be worth streaming as the lead tight end for Chicago. On to the next game, Cardinals at Giants. Cardinals won this one 26-7. Christian Kirk's fantasy production has fallen off a cliff the last half of the season. He's only topped 50 yards once in his last 7 games and hadn't scored in 6. He can be benched for the duration of the playoffs. On the other side of the ball, Daniel Jones was back under center this week, but not much change for his pass catchers. Darius Slayton did lead with 8 targets, but only came away with 31 yards. With Cleveland and Baltimore up next, you can leave all Giants except for maybe Wayne Gallman out of your lineups. On to the next game, Broncos at Panthers. Broncos won this one 32-27. Drew Lock had his best game of the season on Sunday, throwing 4 touchdowns, but it's too little too late. In my opinion, he's just not an option against the Bills this week. Philip Lindsay got double-digit targets, 13 for the second week in a row. But again, he was unable to capitalize on them. I don't think he's healthy. In any case, he lacks enough upside to start him in the playoffs. Tim Patrick has scored thrice in 2 games, but he's averaging 3 targets a game in that span. He's too touchdown dependent to be anything more than a deep league flex. The same can be said for KJ Hamler, who scored twice on Sunday. The staff in Carolina alleges that Christian McCaffrey will be back at some point, but with the Panthers out of playoff contention, that seems unlikely. If you made it this far without him, you're probably better off without the weekly headache. DJ Moore was on the COVID-19 list on Sunday, but he should be back in time for his regular role this week. You can see the sun setting soon in Costa Rica. It's actually where I am right now. Kind of random, but it's a beautiful place. On to the next game. Cowboys at Bengals. Cowboys won this one 30-7. Tony Pollard had 13 touches to Ezekiel Elliott's 14 and scored a receiving touchdown. And what is close to a lost season, the Cowboys are giving run to a hungrier Pollard, it seems. He's not a strong play against San Francisco this week, though. Michael Gallup led the Cowboys in targets for a second week in a row, but Amari Cooper is still the better play as Andy Dalton looks for him in the end zone. Cooper is the only Dallas receiver you can take with you into this week's lineup. On the other side of the ball, the Bengals seem interested in finding out what they have in Travion Williams, running back at A&M, as he led the Bengals backfield on Sunday with 15 touches for 63 yards. I'm not bullish on any member of the Bengals offense in the playoffs, but he could provide some running back help if you're up against it this week. All 3 starting Bengals receivers had at least 5 receptions on Sunday, but it was against Dallas's horrendous secondary, so don't get used to it. In my opinion, T. Higgins is still the only Bengal receiver worth relying on in the playoffs, and that's just in PPR formats. On to the next game, Titans at Jaguars. Titans won this one 31-10. Jeremy Nichols got 11 carries, but that's because the Titans were leading big all day. He is not one to consider for the playoffs. Corey Davis only got 3 targets on the day, but he caught all of them. Detroit should be up should put up a better fight this week, so he should be back in your lineups. Jonnu Smith, on the other hand, should not. Mike Glennon was frustratingly bad on Sunday, and Gardner Minshew came in too late to save DJ Shark's day, though he did at least target him considerably more. If Glennon starts this week, Shark cannot be in your lineups. On to the next game, Chiefs at Dolphins. Chiefs won this one 33-27. Sammy Watkins was the darling of last year's playoffs, but his upside has been capped thus far. He might not be usable until week 16 against Atlanta. Myles Gaskin's late addition to the COVID-19 list dashed many a fantasy hope on the Rocks Sunday, or maybe just mine, but he should be available this week. DeAndre Washington can go back to the bench. Mac Hollins and Lynn Bowden both received 9 targets and 66 and 82 yards, respectively, for Miami on Sunday, with Jakeem Grant and Devontae Parker both suffering leg injuries. Either Bowden or Hollins would be worth a PPR flex if Grant nor Parker can go this week. And then Mike Gesicki was having a stellar 2-touchdown game before going down with an arm injury late. If he cannot go this week, Adam Shaheen makes for an intriguing streaming option for the Dolphins. On to the next game, Vikings at Buccaneers. Vikings lost this one 14-26. With Kirk Cousins constantly under pressure, only the Vikings tight ends had decent fantasy outings against the Bucs. Irv Smith should be in lineups this week if Kyle Rudolph can't return. Things should be easier against the Bears this week, though, as Adam Thielen scored twice and Justin Jefferson went over 135 yards in their first meeting this season. It was an underwhelming day for all of Tampa's pass catchers, as only Mike Evans had more than 50 yards, and not by much. The Bucs play Atlanta this week, so we could get back on track. Just don't expect any of these guys to win your week for you, as Tom Brady limits all of their upsides. On to the next game, Colts at Raiders. Colts won this one 44-27. This is Jonathan Taylor's backfield now, but Nyheim Hines maintains enough value in the passing game to stay relevant in PPR formats. He's the third receiver behind T.Y. Hilton and Michael Pittman. Speaking of Hilton, he's turned into Mr. December, going over 80 yards and scoring in each of his last 3 games. Both he and Michael Pittman are strong starts against Houston this week. On the other side of the ball, Nelson Aguilar has maintained a decent floor of his last 4 games to buoy his considerable upside. He's the only Raiders receiver that you can take into the playoffs with you. And then on to the next game, Jets at Seahawks. Jets lost this one 3-40. With the 3-headed beast in the backfield and a stout Rams defense up this week, no Jet is startable in fantasy. Carlos Hyde outcarried Chris Carson 15-12, but Carson was the goal line back and he was benched in the third quarter as Seattle was playing with a considerable lead. Hyde isn't a viable option this week against Washington. The Seahawks' New Balance attack can sustain DK Metcalf, it seems, but Tyler Lockett needs more shots to stay afloat in fantasy. He's got a good enough floor to flex, but he's no lock to produce outside of PPR formats. On to the next one, Packers at Lions. Packers won this one 31-24. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is as boom and bust as they come, scoring negative fantasy points in week 13, only to put up 85 yards and a touchdown on Sunday. If you're left with low options outside of your flex or low upside options outside of your flex, MVS is worth a shot as he could win your week for you. Marvin Jones was stifled by Jair Alexander in this one, but he should have a much easier go of it against the Titans this week if Kenny Golladay continues to sit out, which seems likely at this point. Danny Amendola has topped 60 yards in his last 2 games and is viable in PPR leagues as long as Golladay is out. Just don't expect him to score because he hasn't this season. On to the next game, the Saints at the Eagles. Saints lost this one 21-24 in Jalen Hurts' first start as an NFL quarterback. We may have seen the last start, though, from Taysom Hill under center for the Saints, as Drew Brees is seemingly likely to return this week. The good news for all Saints skill players not named Hill is that Drew Brees will probably open up the passing game for all involved. Jalen Hurts is much like Hill, and that he makes for a solid high floor start at quarterback, but he diminishes the fantasy values of his pass catchers. Only Miles Sanders and Hurts are worth starting as far as Eagles players go this week. On to the next one, Falcons at Chargers. Falcons lost this one 17-20. Ito Smith led the backfield against the Chargers, getting 12 touches for 45 yards. Todd Gurley started the game, but he's still not right, it seems, and Brian Hill was working in on passing downs. This is just generally a backfield to avoid during the fantasy playoffs. With Julio Jones out with a hamstring injury, Calvin Ridley and Russell Gage led the passing attack, gaining 124 and 82 yards apiece. Hayden Hurst only got 3 targets on the day and doesn't seem to be a part of the Falcons' game plan. Justin Jackson came off IR and was worked in behind Kalen Ballage and Austin Eckler. To little effect, though. Eckler is the only Charger back worth starting in the playoffs, as Ballage and Jackson will eat into each other's values. Mike Williams left the game with a back injury, and Tyron Johnson replaced him on the field, catching 6 of 7 targets for 55 yards and a touchdown. If Williams can't go this week, Johnson would be a reasonable flex against Las Vegas. On to the next one, Washington at the 49ers. Washington won this one 23-15. Alex Smith left the game in the second quarter with a calf injury, leaving Dwayne Haskins to come under center for the first time since week 4. Logan Thomas, tight end, led the team in targets with 7. He and Terry McLaurin would be the only pass catchers you could take into week 15 if Smith can't go this week, which actually might be a boon for McLaurin. Peyton Barber split touches almost evenly with J.D. McKissick, though McKissick put up 86 yards to beat to Barber's 38. If Smith misses this week, McKissick would see a downtick in action as he's Smith's safety blanket. Neither players are advised starts against Seattle this week, though. On the other side of the ball, Jeff Wilson continues to split carries almost evenly with Raheem Mostert and scored the only rushing touchdown for San Francisco on Sunday, though that was while Mostert was being evaluated for a concussion. Wilson has little upside while Mostert is around, but his floor is pretty concrete. And then Deebo Samuel injured his hamstring on Sunday and could miss at least one game. Fire up Brandon Ayuk and even Kendrick Bourne this week, as the 49ers should have an easy day moving the ball through the air against the Cowboys. Then the last game on the Sunday slate, the Steelers at the Bills. Steelers lost this one 15-26. James Conner was back for the first time in 3 weeks, but the Steelers abandoned the run early in this one as they trailed most of the game. They face the Bengals this week, so maybe Conner has one good game left them in the season, as things will be considerably tougher against Indianapolis in Week 16. Chase Claypool is showing just how touchdown dependent he can be, as he hasn't scored in 3 weeks and has little to show for his time on the field otherwise. This week against Cincinnati is a get-right opportunity, but his floor is low. On the other side of the ball, Zach Moss had 13 carries on Sunday night for 43 yards, but unless he scores, he's pretty unusable in fantasy. And then Gabriel Davis pulled through with another touchdown on Sunday, making it 4 in his last 5 games. He also had 8 targets on the night. Playing almost every down, Davis is a suitable flex in most formats. And that's it for the Sunday slate, folks. This has been the Garbage Grab. On behalf of RosterWatch.com, this is the Trash Man. Until next time, be ready.